Clemency for criminal. US President Donald Trump has commuted the sentence of his former campaign advisor Roger Stone. The clemency came days before the beginning of a 40-month prison term for lying to lawmakers investigating Russia's alleged meddling in the 2016 presidential election.
This was an investigation that should have never taken place. He had a jury forewoman who hated Roger Stone and who hated probably me, but she went on a false pretense, and he wasn't given a fair trial. It's not a fair trial. He wasn't given another trial. Should have been given another trial.
The Trump administration argued that Stone has already suffered greatly and is a victim of the Russia hoax. In reality, though, Stone represents loyalty in Trump's circle. That is to say, he has managed to stick to his old friend and not turn against him as did many of his allies.
Really sadistic, arrogant, politically motivated prosecutors. I had a biased judge, I had a stacked jury, I had a corrupt jury forewoman. As my friend Tucker Carlson said, my trial was over before it started.
But what does President Trump's clemency for Roger Stone imply about priorities in the Trump administration? In other words, doesn't it portray the importance of loyalty compared to competence?
Yes, it certainly shows that loyalty is more important than competence, but even more important, it's about trying to prevent the American people from finding out that his election was illegitimate, because after all, Roger Stone was the go-between between WikiLeaks and the Russian trolls in the campaign.
Stone, who has worked on the campaigns of Republican politicians, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, among others, served as an advisor to Trump's 2016 presidential campaign as well.
My sense is that on just like a daily basis, there's more invective from the two presidential candidates than I remember ever seeing.
Yes.
Is that true in your sense?
Yes. This election was always going to be dirty because you have two very polarizing candidates, and it is highly competitive.
But I'm just saying, they're both doing a lot of it.
Yes,
right?
But this was a very effective tactic in the primaries, as you may remember.
Yeah, I do.
And, Crooked Hillary as a hashtag is taken off, as you can see.
Stone had to leave the campaign, or he was just fired by the would-be president in 2015, but continued backing the billionaire business mogul anyway.
It's just hard to see what he's done to the office, his undermining of our institutions, his absolute disregard for the rule of law.
Stone initially urged Trump to run for president in 1998, while serving as his casino business lobbyist in Washington. He has served as Trump's provocateur and self-proclaimed dirty trickster by throwing conspiracy theories around in an attempt to secure support for him in the Republican base, weary of insider politicians.
In order to prevent Roger Stone from going to jail and then testifying against him, because in the United States, the way that you reduce your sentence is to cooperate. President Trump, from the beginning, praised Mr. Stone for not cooperating and then rewarded him.
Trump is not the first and certainly not the last American president to offer clemency to criminals. Egregious use of the pardon power has been common among most presidents, including Bill Clinton's pardons of Mark Rich and others on his last day in office, or George W. Bush's commutation for Scooter Libby, later pardoned by Trump.
Today, President Donald Trump issued an executive grant of clemency that is a full pardon to Scooter Lewis Libby, is a former chief of staff to Vice President Richard Cheney for convictions stemming from a 2007 trial. President George W. Bush had commuted this sentence shortly after the conviction. He nevertheless paid a $250,000 fine and performed 400 hours of community service.
A large number of such commutations have drawn backlash from the opposing party. Yet Roger Stone's case is a little different, as it's being condemned even in the conservative camp by figures such as Senator Mitt Romney.
Roger Stone was treated horribly. Roger Stone was treated very unfairly, just like General Flynn is treated unfairly, just like Papadopoulos was treated unfairly. They've all been treated unfairly. And what I did, I will tell you this. People are extremely happy because in this country they want justice.
Barack Obama also granted commutations more than any other president in U.S. history.
The big difference in the way that this President Trump, has used his clemency powers has been he has ignored the process. Normally, U.S. presidents will go through the Department of Justice. They will get an opinion from the pardon attorney, and then the Deputy Attorney General will evaluate the recommendations of the pardon attorney, and then the president will make a recommendation.
Trump's offer of clemency for Stone is therefore a whole new game, in that it could further deteriorate his bid for re-election in the 2020 presidential election.
The president has been able to do things that are legally controversial and still not pay, I think, a big price in terms of his base not supporting him. But why now is really the question that a lot of people are thinking about, and it's because he didn't want Roger Stone, at least according to the statement out by the White House press secretary, he didn't want Roger Stone to serve any jail time. And he also has been saying over and over again all week that he thinks Roger Stone was treated unfairly, that he was a victim of a witch hunt, that this was really about getting back at him.
Most other presidents have used the power cautiously in a way that they would not suffer from its electoral consequences. The commutation further sheds light on the importance of loyalty in Trump's inner circle. The president basically rewards anyone with incriminating information about him, just as long as they keep silent.
I'm like this great loyalty freak. I'm loyal to a point of the absurd.
I'm so loyal to people that when somebody's slightly disloyal to me, I look upon it as a great act of horror.
You know, some of these people have like a 10% loyalty, meaning if they sneeze in the wrong direction, they're gone.
Apart from the latest move, Trump's performance is live proof of how corrupt the Justice Department and judicial processes are in the United States, which says a thing or two about the national resolve to end injustice in today's climate.
Is calculated to help in President Trump's re-election. Because, as I mentioned before, there was a danger that Roger Stone was going to have to tell the truth about his role as an intermediary between the Russian trolls, WikiLeaks, and the disinformation campaign.
President Trump has posited various affronts to the rule of law, but Stone's case is one of the most severe ones. Apart from unveiling lack of any fair process in the U.S. justice system, Stone's commutation contributes to further polarization of the country in an election year.
We're going to stop the radical left. We're going to build a future of safety and opportunity for Americans of every race, color, religion, and creed. Republicans are the party of liberty, equality, and justice for all. We are the party of Abraham Lincoln, and we are the party of law and order.
The 2020 presidential election cannot only unseat Trump, but also create a new Justice Department that can reverse some of Trump's measures, including the criminal sentence for his old friend Roger.
As long as I'm Attorney General, the criminal justice system will not be used for partisan political ends. And this is especially true for the upcoming elections in November. We live in a very divided country right now, and I think that it is critical that we have an election where the American people are allowed to make a decision, a choice, between President Trump and Vice President Biden.
After conviction for lying to investigators, obstructing a congressional inquiry, and witness tampering, the president is now commuting his sentence, but not ultimately pardoning him.
So now Roger Stone, instead of being in jail, will spend the next 4 months going into the public to defend the president, and probably will do additional dirty tricks in disinformation. We also have, during this administration, we have had 5 inspector generals, which the president has either fired or made to step aside. The last one was investigating the Secretary of State.
Stone, therefore, remains a convicted felon, although he might not have to go to prison for now. The Trump re-election campaign is meanwhile hoping that the clemency for a criminal could further energize the Republican base in favor of the president.
There was no circumstance under which I would bear false witness against the president. I was just not willing to lie. Now, in the last 2 days, when I said that, people said, you see, Stone had the goods on Trump, and he traded his silence for a commutation. That is patently false. I never said that. I never implied that. What I said has been consistent, that I would not lie against my friend of 40 years so they could use it for impeachment.
He remained loyal, but a commutation fails to erase or even call into question Stone's guilt. If the Democrats gain power in the November race, a left-wing Justice Department could take on Stone again and continue with power play, embedded within legal battles in the broken justice system.
2,000 former federal prosecutors have written a letter demanding that the Attorney General resign. So, and another sad point is that the judiciary has been unable to decide no less than 3 cases brought against the president for violating the emoluments clause. That is the clause in the United States Constitution that prohibits American presidents from receiving things of value from foreign leaders.
Former Trump campaign advisor and man genetically designed to look guilty, Roger Stone, is back in the headlines. Stone was about to begin a 40-month prison sentence for witness tampering, lying to Congress, and obstruction of justice in connection with the Mueller investigation. But it turns out it really does pay to have friends in high places.
Tonight, the breaking news: the president commuted the prison sentence for his friend of several decades, Roger Stone.
Republican Senator Mitt Romney accusing the president of unprecedented historic corruption.
This is bribery pure and simple, a quid pro quo.
The president, through this commutation, is basically saying, if you lie for me, if you cover up for me, if you have my back, then I will make sure that you get a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Oh, wow. I think Trump is going to have to update his campaign chants after this. Lock him up! Unless he's my friend, then set him free!
Heating Cold War. Officials in the United States are sounding the alarm as the US-China Cold War becomes increasingly more contentious.
To uphold our legitimate interests, China will make the necessary responses to sanction the relevant personnel and entities of the U.S. side. We urge the U.S. to correct mistakes and to not implement this act and stop interfering in China's internal affairs.
Beijing and Washington keep trading barbs and sanctions while trying to expand horizons of their influence across the globe. That has raised possibility of confrontation between the two superpowers evermore. There are even fears of an all-out war in the disputed South China Sea.
It's not China's maritime empire. If Beijing violates the international law and free nations do nothing, then history shows that the CCP will simply take more territory. That happened in the last administration. So we will then go use the tools that we have available, and we will support countries all across the world who recognize that China has violated their legal territorial claims as well, or maritime claims as well.
Leaders in Washington are also concerned about the rising specter of influence on the side of China elsewhere, such as in Iran, where Tehran and Beijing signed an investment and security pact by defying U.S. maximum pressure.
What you're seeing now is the result of U.S. sanctions. The U.S. has, with the Trump administration, when Donald Trump handed the Secretary of Treasury position to Mr. Mnuchin, he handed over to Israel, the Israel lobby, and Wall Street Jews, who then abused the power of the dollar to basically zero out. They don't want Iran to have any foreign trade whatsoever. Zero is like what Pompeo said. Completely cutting off Iran's ability to sell oil to the rest of the world. A completely tyrannical move.
Since its nascent days, the Trump administration has been at odds with China on various fields, but particularly on trade issues.
One of the things that you were watching was the trade relations between the U.S. and China. And today we got some news on that front with President Trump saying that the U.S.-China relationship is severely damaged, to put it in his words. He also said that the Phase 2 trade deal is not a priority. And it's interesting that we're seeing such significant gains on a day when something that we think would rattle investors doesn't seem to be doing so.
In its 2017 national security strategy, the White House labeled China a revisionist power and a major strategic rival, which showed how ready Trump is to curb China's influence in the world.
We will hold China accountable for a number of things. And walking through that list, obviously, we put enormous blame on China's behavior over the pandemic. The lack of transparency, they wouldn't work with us. They wouldn't work with the Europeans. They will be held accountable for that. There are national security issues here that are very delicate. They will be held accountable.
Trump's broken policies, however, have meant nothing but weakening of the U.S. hegemony in resourceful regions, namely West Asia, where Iran continues resisting the Trump administration's economic terrorism, in part by an agreement with China that defines a roadmap to mutual cooperation.
The conflict between America and China goes all the way back to the fundamental conflict between England and the rest of the world. Halford Mackinder wrote a book called The Pivot of Civilization, in which he said there was a conflict between the island nations, by which he meant England, the United States, Canada, and Australia. In other words, the Anglosphere, the world that speaks English, and the Eurasian landmass. Now, the whole point of British foreign policy was to divide the Eurasian landmass. As soon as it looked as if there was going to be alliances, England would declare war.
Under Trump, the U.S. is directly challenging Beijing's efforts to assert control in the strategic waters of the South China Sea. The shift in policy is a telltale that U.S. hegemony is oozing back towards the West, and how Beijing might be spreading its influence.
The U.S. statement ignores the history and objective facts of the South China Sea issue, violates the U.S. government's open commitment to the South China Sea's sovereignty issue, and violates and distorts international law. It intentionally stirs up controversy over maritime sovereignty claims, destroys regional peace and stability, and is an irresponsible act.
China's recent deal with Iran is also significant in this regard, as it indicates that Beijing might also be undergoing a strategic shift in its dealings with America.
That, as you know, we're placing massive tariffs and have placed very large tariffs on China. First time that's ever happened to China. Billions of dollars have been paid to the United States, of which I've given quite a bit to the farmers and ranchers of our country because they were targeted.
The US withdrew from the internationally backed nuclear deal with Tehran unilaterally, and the latest deal between Tehran and Beijing may suggest failure on the side of other signatories, namely Europeans, in standing up to the US bullying worldwide.
China is building infrastructure to solidify its markets in Europe. So it's not as important as it was. The second thing is that the United States is presiding over a lot of obsolete military technology. And one of the main obsolete pieces of technology is the aircraft carrier. The Chinese now have missiles that have a range of 1,200 miles that can destroy aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers only have a range with the aircraft of 600 miles. This is the essence of military strategy.
At the helm of the State Department, Mike Pompeo is fanning the flames in US global battlefields. The former spymaster spares no efforts to tighten the noose around China's economy by imposing new sanctions regularly. The US pressure on Huawei, for instance, has affected the UK, where the Chinese tech company's 5G kits must be removed by 2027.
I think the business, they can make their own conclusion. So I think the trust is a serious damage between the country level, between the government level, and among the businesses.
While simultaneously picking on Beijing on various pretexts, namely the situation in Hong Kong, the Trump administration shamelessly acknowledges that the US has been behind the UK's decision to take on Huawei.
We convinced many countries, and I did this myself for the most part, not to use Huawei because we think it's an unsafe security risk. It's a big security risk. I talked many countries out of using it. If they want to do business with us, they can't use it.
As the US mounts pressure on China, Beijing's response is similar, imposing sanctions on relevant US personnel and entities in an effort to defend its legitimate interests.
And they're doing this by building the Silk Road or the One Belt, One Road. So basically, if you have a railroad connection between Shanghai and Rotterdam, you don't need a navy. You don't need ships. And if you don't need ships, then the English Navy or the American Navy can't blockade your ports, and you've achieved economic independence. That's what I think China is trying to do right now.
The Cold War between the US and China is increasingly escalating. Fears of war are also serious, considering that opposing China's influence is one of few things both Republicans and Democrats agree in the highly polarized country.
We're in a position where if we don't set the rules, we, in fact, are going to find ourselves with China setting the rules. And that's why you need to organize the world to take on China to stop the corrupt practices that are underway.
Trump initially engaged in a cordial interaction with President Xi Jinping, but that has practically proven to be useless, given the fact that not just trade, but all other critical issues between the two world powers are getting out of control.
Thank you, sir. I want to know, when's the last time you spoke with President Xi of China, and do you plan to speak with him in the near future?
No, I haven't spoken to him. Well, no, I don't. I have no plan to speak to him.
While some inside the United States call for renewed dialogue to manage the relationship, others are adopting a malevolent anti-China stance. This could make the future of cooperation between the two world powers more obscure than ever before.